"You'll never see me coming," Selena whispered to herself, the words more promise than threat, as she adjusted the strap of her gown and took a steadying breath outside the grand entrance of the award hall. The hall shimmered under golden chandeliers, a sea of designers, executives, and media personalities dressed to impress, glasses clinking faintly against the hum of hushed conversations, the air thick with anticipation. Selena's eyes scanned the crowd, calm and unwavering, her twin girls, Amara and Leila, holding each of her hands, their small fingers entwined in hers, their matching cream dresses soft under the spotlight's edge. She felt the weight of the past years in her shoulders, each step forward a measured reclaiming of dignity, a silent challenge to the man who had once dismissed her with a smirk. Ethan Blackwell, seated at the head table, charismatic, polished in his tailored navy suit, laughed lightly at a colleague's joke, unaware that the crowd's attention would soon fracture, that every flash of light would bend toward her entrance. The camera operators positioned strategically along the velvet rope frames caught the first glimmers of her presence, whispering among themselves, while phones tilted, ready to record, the murmurs growing to a crescendo as Selena's heels clicked on the marble floor, a rhythm as commanding as the pulse of her own heartbeat. The twins' wide eyes reflected the glittering chandeliers, their innocence amplifying the power of the moment, each step a declaration of agency and strength, the audience sensing the tension, the shift in the room, the unspoken story hovering just beneath polished smiles and crystal glasses. A hush swept through the room when she emerged fully into view, her posture regal, spine straight, chin lifted slightly, the light catching the subtle curve of her confident smile, while Ethan's gaze, distracted seconds before, locked onto her with disbelief, the confident facade faltering, his pulse quickening as the whispers among the crowd sharpened. Selena moved slowly, deliberately, letting the twins adjust their tiny hands in hers, their heads tilting curiously toward the surrounding faces, unknowing yet pivotal in the silent recalibration of power. The flashes of cameras erupted like tiny fireworks around her, each click capturing a fraction of history, each frame another testament to her resilience, the story unfolding in real time, the echoes of past humiliation dissipating into the grandeur of present authority. Ethan's jaw tightened, a subtle tremor betraying the surprise he struggled to mask, his hand unconsciously reaching for the microphone at his table, which he finally set down, speechless as the realization dawned. The very presence of Selena and her daughters bending the room's energy, reshaping expectation, casting him into the shadow of what he had once underestimated. And as the orchestra of gasps, whispers, and soft steps of onlookers melded together, Selena allowed a momentary glance at Ethan, eyes steady, conveying the strength of a woman who had risen from the margins, who had nurtured, protected, and flourished without the need for approval. And then she continued forward, her every movement a quiet but undeniable claim of victory, leaving the audience suspended on the precipice of revelation, the twins' laughter tinkling faintly like wind chimes, promising more secrets and surprises yet to unfold, a story that was only beginning, the room holding its collective breath for the next chapter of power, justice, and unbroken pride. The silence did not break all at once. It spread in slow waves, table by table, row by row, until the entire ballroom seemed to lean toward the same impossible sight. Ethan remained frozen beside his chair, his fingers still hovering near the microphone he had almost lifted, his expression no longer polished for cameras but stripped down to something raw and dangerously human. Selena could feel every eye in the room measuring the distance between them, every whisper sharpening into recognition, but she did not rush. She had not spent 6 years rebuilding her life just to surrender this moment to nerves. Her pace stayed slow, elegant, deliberate, the soft sound of her heels gliding over marble in perfect rhythm with the orchestra's fading strings. Amara looked up first, her big brown eyes curious as she noticed the giant gold statue at the center of the stage. "Mommy, is that the man from the picture?" she asked in a small, innocent voice that somehow carried farther than the room's most expensive sound system. The question landed like a spark in dry air. A dozen nearby guests turned their heads. Ethan's breath caught so sharply it was almost audible. Selena lowered her gaze to her daughter and offered the faintest smile, one filled with patience, dignity, and years of hard-earned control. "Not yet, baby," she said softly. "Tonight, we are only here for the truth." The words sent another ripple through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Executives who had spent years protecting Ethan's public image suddenly looked unsure where to place their eyes. Across the room, the giant screen behind the stage still glowed with his name in silver letters, celebrating him as the city's visionary chief executive. But now that title felt strangely smaller, almost fragile beneath Selena's presence. Ethan finally stepped away from his table. His shoes crossed the floor with measured calm, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed the storm inside him. The confident charm he wore in boardrooms and interviews was gone, replaced by the unmistakable tremor of a man confronting a past he thought had disappeared. "Selena," he said, her name leaving his mouth like something both sacred and dangerous. It had been years since she heard him say it, yet she did not flinch. Her shoulders stayed squared, her chin slightly lifted, the twins safe at her sides like living proof of every silent sacrifice she had made. Leila tilted her head, studying Ethan with the open curiosity only a child could carry. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. The same strong brows, the same thoughtful eyes, the same way her small hand curled when she felt uncertain. Gasps fluttered from the surrounding tables as people began putting together what the room had not yet dared to say aloud. Ethan saw it too. His gaze dropped to the girls, and for one unguarded second, all the color left his face. The master of ceremonies, unsure whether to continue the award program or disappear entirely, took a hesitant step back from the stage. The cameras, however, did not stop. Their lenses zoomed tighter, catching every shift in Ethan's expression, every flicker of realization in his eyes, every ounce of Selena's composed silence. This was no longer an awards gala. It had become a reckoning in black tie. Selena finally stopped at the foot of the stage, directly beneath the glow of the giant screen. The spotlight, once meant for Ethan's acceptance speech, now poured over her instead, wrapping her in gold and silver light, as if the night itself had chosen its true centerpiece. Ethan stood only a few feet away now, close enough to see the calm in her face, the kind of calm built from betrayal survived and dignity preserved. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost private despite the hundreds listening. Selena looked at him for a long moment, then glanced toward the twins, whose tiny fingers still held tightly to hers. When she met his eyes again, her voice came steady and clear. "Because tonight," she said, "before this city hands you another trophy, they deserve to know what you walked away from." At that exact moment, the giant screen behind them flickered. The polished silver logo vanished. In its place appeared an old photograph from 6 years ago, Ethan and Selena together, younger, smiling, his hand resting over hers. The entire ballroom gasped as one, and Ethan turned slowly toward the screen, his breath stopping at the image that was only the first piece of a much larger truth waiting to unfold. For one suspended heartbeat, no one in the ballroom moved. The photograph glowing across the giant screen held the entire room hostage, its soft golden light spilling over crystal glasses, black tuxedos, and stunned faces. Ethan stared at the image as if the past had physically stepped into the room and taken hold of his throat. 6 years vanished in an instant. There they were, younger and impossibly close, standing on a rooftop terrace in Manhattan, city lights glittering behind them like promises neither of them knew would shatter. Selena remembered that night with painful clarity, the chill of the October air, the warmth of Ethan's hand covering hers, the quiet certainty in his voice when he had once said, "No matter where this company takes me, I will never let go of what matters." The irony of those words now hung in the ballroom like smoke. Around them, whispers turned into open murmurs. Names were being repeated. Faces leaned closer. Investors, board members, reporters, and socialites all searched Ethan's face for the polished response he always had ready. But tonight there was none. Tonight the city's golden executive looked like a man seeing his own reflection for the first time. Selena did not speak immediately. Silence was part of the power she had learned to master. Beside her, Amara squeezed her hand, glancing between the glowing screen and Ethan with wide, searching eyes. Leila stayed close against Selena's side, her small fingers brushing the silk of her mother's gown. The girls did not fully understand the storm around them, but they understood their mother's calm, and they borrowed strength from it. Ethan finally turned back from the screen, his voice lower than before, stripped of performance. "Who put that up there?" he asked, though the answer was already obvious in the quiet confidence standing before him. Selena met his gaze without blinking. "I did," she said, "because memory has a way of surviving even when people try to bury it." A soft wave of gasps moved through the crowd. The words were not cruel, yet they cut deeper than accusation because they were true. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes drifting once more to the twins. The resemblance no longer whispered. It shouted. Every person in the front rows could see it now, and the realization moved through the room like a current. One of the senior board members, a silver-haired woman known for her sharp instincts, slowly lowered her champagne flute and stared openly at the girls, then at Ethan, then back again. The media section near the back had become a forest of raised phones, every lens capturing the unraveling of a narrative the public had worshipped for years. Ethan took another step closer, the distance between them now so small that only the twins stood as the final line between past and present. "Selena," he said, quieter now, "why did you never tell me?" The question almost made the room forget to breathe. Selena's face remained composed, but something old and wounded flickered behind her eyes before settling again into dignity. "Tell you," she repeated softly. "The night I found out I was pregnant, your office sent me a legal statement saying your future had no room for distractions, scandals, or liabilities. By the next morning, your engagement to another woman was on every business blog in America." The room erupted in whispers so sharp they almost sounded like static. Ethan's face tightened, disbelief colliding with shame. "I never sent that," he said, and for the first time all night, Selena saw something she had not expected, genuine confusion. Her breath slowed. The certainty she had carried for years shifted, not broken, but disturbed. The giant screen flickered again before either of them could say more. The old rooftop photograph dissolved into a scanned letter, crisp white against black, bearing Ethan's company letterhead and a signature at the bottom. But the signature looked strange under the magnified lights, too stiff, too mechanical. Ethan stared at it, his brows pulling together. "That is not my signature," he said, louder this time, the shock in his voice ringing across the ballroom. Selena turned toward the screen, the twins following her gaze. The city's most celebrated award night had transformed completely now. It was no longer about success. It was about truth, buried under 6 years of lies, beginning to crack open in front of everyone. And as Ethan looked from the forged letter to Selena, then down to the twin girls whose existence had already changed the room forever, both of them realized the same thing at once. Someone had not only torn them apart. Someone had built an empire of silence on the ruins of what should have been their family. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. The chandeliers still shimmered above the polished marble, and the orchestra still held their instruments in frozen readiness, but the room's heartbeat had shifted entirely. What had begun as Ethan's moment of triumph had become something far heavier, a public excavation of a lie that had survived 6 long years. Selena stood beneath the wash of silver light from the giant screen, the twins close at her sides, while the forged letter glowed above them like a ghost finally given a voice. Ethan stared at the signature again, his mind racing through names, faces, and moments he had once dismissed as ordinary business. Then it hit him with the force of cold realization. Victoria Hale. The name rose in his memory with unsettling precision. His former chief of staff. The woman who had controlled his calendar, his correspondence, and every private message during the most ruthless expansion year of Blackwell Global. The same year he had been pushed into the public engagement that launched his company's image into the elite social pages of New York. Ethan's jaw tightened as pieces that never made sense before began sliding into place. The sudden silence from Selena. The unanswered calls he thought she had chosen to ignore. The way Victoria had once reassured him with practiced calm that Selena wanted distance and had moved on. At the time, he had been too consumed by hostile takeovers, board pressure, and a father's relentless demand for perfection to question it. Now, standing under the gaze of half the city's most powerful people, He felt the truth turning in his chest like a lock finally opening. Selena watched the realization spread across his face, and for the first time that night, she saw not the untouchable executive the world admired, but the man beneath the empire, the one who had once laughed with her over midnight coffee in a Brooklyn apartment before power had made everything colder. Victoria, Ethan said, barely above a whisper, yet the name carried across the hushed ballroom. A murmur rippled through the guests. Several executives exchanged glances. The board members near the front table looked suddenly rigid, as if the foundation beneath their seats had shifted. Selena's expression did not break, but inside, something trembled. She remembered Victoria too well. The polished smile, the carefully chosen words. The woman who once met her in the lobby of Ethan's headquarters and handed her the letter with the cold certainty of someone delivering a verdict already decided. He chose the company. Victoria had told her that day. He cannot afford your complications. Selena had walked away carrying not only heartbreak, but the first fragile secret of the lives growing inside her. For years, she had buried the memory beneath work, motherhood, and survival, turning pain into structure and silence into discipline. Yet hearing Ethan say the name now, hearing the disbelief in his voice, cracked open a possibility she had never allowed herself to consider. What if he truly had never known? The giant screen flickered again, and the room gasped as another document replaced the forged letter. This time, it was an archived internal memo from Blackwell Global, timestamped the morning after Selena disappeared from Ethan's life. The subject line read, Crisis Narrative Strategy. Beneath it, in bold letters, was a directive approved under Victoria Hale's department, instructing all staff to suppress personal inquiries related to Ethan's prior private relationship and redirect media focus toward his upcoming engagement announcement. Ethan's breath left him slowly. The proof was no longer emotional. It was corporate, documented, undeniable. Around the ballroom, phones lifted even higher. Reporters in evening gowns and tuxedos whispered urgently to their editors. The city's most glamorous award night had transformed into a boardroom scandal unfolding in real time. Selena felt Amara lean gently against her side. "Mommy, why is everyone staring?" her daughter whispered. Selena lowered her gaze and smoothed a hand over the girl's curls, grounding herself in the simple warmth of the moment. "Because sometimes the truth takes a long time to find the light," she said softly. Ethan heard her words, and when his eyes lifted to meet hers again, there was no defense left in them, only the dawning horror of what had been stolen from them both. He looked down at Amara and Leila, at the daughters whose faces mirrored pieces of him he had never been allowed to see grow, and something in his carefully controlled world fractured. But before he could speak, before Selena could decide whether this revelation changed anything at all, the ballroom doors opened. Every head turned as a woman in a white satin suit stepped into the silver glow, her expression calm, elegant, and terrifyingly composed. Victoria Hale had arrived, and the silence that followed felt like the sharp inhale before the entire empire finally collapsed. The moment Victoria Hale stepped into the ballroom, the atmosphere changed again. Her white satin suit caught the chandelier light like polished armor, every line of her posture precise, every movement carrying the confidence of a woman who had spent years mastering rooms exactly like this one. Conversations died mid-whisper. The orchestra lowered their instruments completely. Even the servers along the back wall stood motionless with silver trays suspended in the air. Victoria did not rush. She walked with the same unshakable calm Selena had once mistaken for professionalism and now recognized as strategy. Her heels traced a measured rhythm across the marble floor, closing the distance toward the stage while every camera lens in the room turned in perfect unison. Ethan stared at her, the name he had spoken moments ago still heavy in the air between them. "Victoria," he said again, this time sharper, less disbelief and more accusation. She stopped just below the stage lights, her expression unreadable, her lipstick flawless, her gaze gliding first to Ethan, then to Selena, and finally to the twin girls. For the first time that night, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. Selena felt it immediately. The same cold intelligence that had once handed her a forged ending was now standing in front of the entire city, dressed in grace and expensive silk. I wondered how long it would take for this night to become about the past, Victoria said, her voice smooth enough to calm a boardroom and dangerous enough to freeze one. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Ethan stepped down from the stage completely now, no longer hiding behind podiums, trophies, or corporate applause. "Did you do this?" he asked. His tone was steady, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. "Did you forge those letters? Did you keep Selena away from me?" Victoria's lips curved into something too elegant to be called a smile. "I protected the company," she said. The words landed with the chilling certainty of someone who had rehearsed them for years. Gasps rose from the tables nearest the front. Selena's fingers tightened around Amara and Leila's hands, not from fear, but from the old ache of hearing her pain reduced to strategy. Victoria turned slightly, allowing the silver glow from the giant screen to frame her like a witness stand of light. "You were in the middle of the Meridian acquisition," she continued, addressing Ethan as if the ballroom around them did not exist. "The board needed stability. Investors needed a clean narrative. A private relationship with a woman outside your social profile, followed by an unexpected pregnancy, would have damaged everything we spent years building." The words struck the room like shattered glass. No one spoke. No one moved. Selena felt the full weight of every eye in the ballroom shifting toward her now, and yet she did not shrink. She had lived through the consequence of that decision. She had built a life beyond it. Beside her, Leila leaned closer, sensing the tension she could not yet understand. Ethan's face hardened in a way Selena had never seen before, not with arrogance, but with something colder and more devastating, betrayal. "So you decided for me," he said quietly. Victoria's expression remained composed. "I decided for Blackwell Global," she corrected. "And judging by where you stand tonight, receiving the city's highest leadership honor, I made the right call." The arrogance of it sent another wave of whispers through the room. Board members exchanged alarmed looks. Reporters typed furiously into glowing phones beneath the tablecloth shadows. Selena felt the strange stillness of justice approaching, not loud, not dramatic, but precise. Ethan turned slowly toward the twins. Their faces, so open and innocent, carried 6 years of birthdays, first steps, bedtime stories, and scraped knees he had never seen. The empire Victoria claimed to protect suddenly seemed microscopic beside what had been taken from him. He looked back at her, and this time his voice carried across the ballroom. With the authority that had built Blackwell Global from a startup into a national force. "You did not protect the company," he said. "You stole my family." The room erupted in whispers so fierce it sounded like wind moving through glass. Victoria's calm finally cracked, only slightly, but enough. Selena saw it. A tightness in her jaw, a flicker of uncertainty behind the polished mask. For the first time, the woman who had controlled every narrative no longer owned the room. The giant screen flickered again, and a new file appeared. An internal transfer authorization. Millions of dollars moved into a private shell account under Victoria's legal trust during the same quarter Selena vanished. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Selena's pulse slowed into something steady and undeniable. This was bigger than heartbreak now. Bigger than lies. The truth was no longer just personal. It was corruption, manipulation, and a 6-year deception unraveling in front of the city's most powerful witnesses. Victoria lifted her chin, preparing to speak again, but before she could, Amara's small voice rose into the stunned silence. "Mommy," she asked softly, looking up at Selena, "is this the lady who made Daddy disappear?" And in the silence that followed, Victoria finally looked shaken. Amara's question hung in the ballroom with a kind of innocence that made the truth feel even sharper. No accusation from a board member, no investigative headline, no legal document on the giant screen had struck as deeply as the quiet confusion in a little girl's voice. For the first time that night, Victoria Hale's polished expression faltered in full view of everyone. It was subtle, a flicker at the corner of her mouth, the smallest tightening around her eyes. But in a room trained to read power, it was enough. Selena felt Leila's fingers curl tighter around her hand, the child instinctively sensing the shift in the woman standing across from them. Ethan turned toward his daughters, and the words still echoed inside him with a force stronger than any applause he had received that evening. "Daddy." The room had heard it too. It changed everything. The glamorous ballroom, once built for celebration, had become a chamber of reckoning where titles, wealth, and social polish no longer mattered. Victoria straightened her shoulders, gathering herself with the discipline of someone who had survived decades in executive warfare. "Children misunderstand adult decisions," she said smoothly, her tone regaining its practiced calm. "This is not the place to dramatize corporate strategy." Selena's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of a woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to stand in the truth. "Corporate strategy?" she repeated softly. "You call 6 years of stolen fatherhood strategy?" The murmurs swelled around the room, and several board members near the front table lowered their eyes, as if the cost of their silence had suddenly become visible. Ethan stepped closer, no longer the man standing at the center of a brand, but a father seeing the shape of his loss in real time. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to the twins' level, his movements careful, almost reverent, as if afraid the moment itself might disappear. Amara studied him with fearless curiosity. Leila stayed closer to Selena, peeking around the silk folds of her gown. Under the chandelier light, their resemblance to Ethan had become undeniable to everyone in the room. "I did not disappear," Ethan said, his voice quieter now, but carrying farther than before because the room had surrendered itself entirely to the truth. He looked at the girls as he spoke, wanting them to hear what should have been said years ago. "I was kept away." Selena watched him carefully. The old ache in her chest had not vanished, but something inside her shifted as she saw the sincerity in his eyes. There was no executive performance left in him now, no public charm, only grief, regret, and the slow awakening of love denied too long. The giant screen flickered again, and a final chain of internal messages appeared, time-stamped across the week. Selena had once waited for a call that never came. Each one traced back to Victoria's executive office, rerouting Selena's emails, blocking her calls, and fabricating calendar conflicts to keep Ethan on the opposite side of the country whenever she tried to reach him. The ballroom erupted into open disbelief. Reporters no longer whispered. They typed furiously, the glow of phone screens reflecting off crystal and gold. This was no longer a private heartbreak made public. It was a documented conspiracy inside the highest levels of Blackwell Global. Victoria's voice cut through the noise, sharper now. "Everything I did made this company untouchable," she said. "Without my decisions, there would be no Blackwell empire, no tonight, no legacy." Ethan rose slowly, his gaze leaving the screen and settling on her with a steadiness that chilled the room. "A legacy built on theft is not a legacy," he said. "It is a lie." The words landed like a verdict. Selena felt the twins shift beside her, and for the first time all evening, she allowed herself to breathe differently. Not as the woman who had come to expose the truth, but as the mother who had finally brought her daughters into the light they deserved. Amara looked up at Ethan again, her expression thoughtful. "So you wanted to know us?" she asked softly. Ethan's face softened in a way the cameras had never captured before, stripped of power and image, revealing something far more human. "Every day I did not know you existed was stolen from me," he said. "But if you let me, I would like to spend every day after tonight earning that time back." The innocence in the twins' faces held the room in silence. Even Victoria, standing beneath the silver glow of the screen and the weight of her unraveling empire, seemed smaller now. Then one of the board's senior legal advisors stood from the front table, his voice calm and formal as it carried through the ballroom. "Ms. Hale," he said, "effective immediately, you are suspended pending criminal and fiduciary investigation." A collective gasp swept the room, but Selena's attention was no longer on Victoria. It was on Ethan, on the daughters looking up at him, and on the fragile, breathtaking possibility that truth had not only exposed the past tonight, but opened the door to something none of them had believed possible anymore. The legal advisor's announcement settled over the ballroom like the final note of a symphony, long and impossible to ignore. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Victoria Hale stood beneath the silver light of the giant screen, her empire of influence stripped away not by rumor, but by evidence, witnesses, and the innocence of 2 little girls who had unknowingly carried the most undeniable truth into the room. The board members remained seated in stunned silence, their polished faces reflecting the realization that the woman they had trusted to protect the company had instead poisoned its foundation. Reporters along the back wall were already feeding the story into live updates, their screens glowing with headlines that would dominate every financial and social column in America by morning. But Selena's world had narrowed far beyond board investigations and public scandal. Her focus stayed on the quiet space between Ethan and the twins. For the first time in 6 years, the distance between father and daughters was measured not in missing birthdays or stolen first words, but in a few careful feet of marble floor and a decision that belonged entirely to the children. Ethan remained where he stood, shoulders no longer squared with corporate pride, but softened by something far rarer in his world: humility. The room had seen him command billion-dollar negotiations, outmaneuver rivals, and shape industries. Yet this was the first moment he looked genuinely uncertain. He glanced at Selena, not asking for forgiveness, only permission to be present. Selena felt the weight of that look settle against the years she had carried alone. The exhaustion of double workdays. The school recitals attended with one empty seat in her mind. The nights she had answered impossible questions from the girls with stories gentle enough to preserve their sense of worth. She had not come tonight for revenge. She had come for truth. And now truth had opened a door she had never expected to see again. Amara was the first to move. Her small cream shoes tapped softly against the marble as she stepped toward Ethan, curiosity brighter than fear. Leila hesitated, then followed half a step behind, her hand still brushing the edge of Selena's gown, as if drawing courage from her mother's calm. Ethan lowered himself fully to one knee, bringing himself into their world, his expensive tuxedo forgotten against the polished floor. The entire ballroom seemed to exhale at once. Cameras flashed, but softer now, less scandal and more witness. "Hi," Amara said, her voice gentle and fearless in the hush. Ethan smiled, the expression breaking across his face with a tenderness no one in the room had ever seen from him. "Hi," he answered, and the single syllable carried more emotion than any acceptance speech he could have given that night. Leila studied him carefully, her head tilted in the thoughtful way Selena knew so well. "Mommy says truth matters more than timing," she said. Ethan's eyes lifted briefly to Selena, and something unspoken passed between them. Not reconciliation, not yet, but recognition. "Your mommy is right," he said softly. "She has always been right." The words hit Selena harder than she expected. Not because they erased the past, but because they honored the years she had survived without needing anyone to validate them. Around them, the ballroom's energy had transformed. The award trophy still sat untouched at the podium, its gold surface catching the chandelier light, suddenly insignificant beside the human moment unfolding below it. One of the board chairs quietly instructed staff to end the formal program, but no one rushed to leave. The city's most powerful guests stayed rooted to their places, drawn into the rare gravity of dignity restored in real time. Ethan looked back at the girls, his voice quieter now. "I missed your first steps," he said. "I missed your birthdays. I missed every bedtime story. I cannot change that. But if your mother allows it, I would like to start with tomorrow morning. Pancakes, cartoons, anything you want." Amara's eyes widened. "With strawberries?" she asked. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the ballroom, the first warmth the room had felt all night. Ethan's smile deepened. "As many strawberries as the plate can hold." Selena felt something loosen in her chest, not trust, but the first fragile thread of possibility. She stepped closer, the silver light catching the calm in her face, and looked down at Ethan kneeling before the daughters who had inherited both his eyes and her strength. "Tomorrow morning is not a promise," she said steadily. "It is an opportunity. Do not confuse the two." Ethan nodded once, accepting the truth in her words with the same gravity he once reserved for board votes and acquisition terms. "I understand," he said, and for the first time since she walked into the ballroom, Selena believed he might. Behind them, Victoria was quietly escorted toward the side exit, her silence swallowed by the far greater story now unfolding in the center of the room. The empire she manipulated was collapsing, but something far more meaningful had just begun to rise. Not a romance reborn, not yet, but a family finally meeting under the light that should have found them years ago. By the time the ballroom doors reopened to the cool midnight air, The city beyond the glass had transformed into a sea of flashing cameras and waiting headlines. News vans lined the curb outside the Blackwell Tower, satellite dishes angled toward the skyline. Reporters in designer coats speaking urgently into microphones as word of the scandal and the suspension inside spread faster than the champagne had flowed an hour earlier. Yet inside the grand hall, where the chandeliers still glowed above abandoned crystal glasses and untouched dessert plates, the atmosphere had softened into something far more intimate. The formal program was over. The applause that had once been reserved for trophies had given way to quieter sounds. The rustle of gowns, the distant clink of staff clearing tables, and the small, curious voices of two girls standing beside the father they had only just met. Ethan rose slowly from one knee, careful not to break the fragile trust that had begun to take shape in the last few minutes. Amara was already smiling, the promise of strawberry pancakes turning over in her mind like a treasure. Leila, still more cautious, reached out and touched the sleeve of Ethan's tuxedo jacket, as if confirming he was real. Ethan looked at Selena before he spoke again, and this time there was no public audience left to impress, no board members to sway, no cameras that mattered. More than the people in front of him. "There is a private family lounge upstairs," he said quietly. "No press, no executives, no noise. Just somewhere warm and calm for the girls." Selena studied him carefully. The old instinct to protect rose first, sharpened by years of being the only shield her daughters had ever known. But she also saw the way Amara was already leaning toward him with fearless openness, and the way Leila's guarded expression had softened into thoughtful curiosity. Tonight had never been about punishing Ethan. It had been about giving the truth a place to breathe. And now the truth was asking what came next. She gave a single, measured nod. The elevator ride to the private lounge felt strangely still after the storm below. Floor numbers glowed softly above the mirrored doors as the city lights climbed higher around them, Manhattan stretching out in glittering ribbons beneath the glass walls. The twins stood between Selena and Ethan, their reflections multiplying in the polished metal. Two little girls caught between the mother who had built their world and the father they were only beginning to understand. When the doors opened, the lounge greeted them in warm amber light, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline, low velvet couches arranged around a marble coffee table, and a quiet kitchenette glowing in the corner. It was the kind of room built for discreet billion-dollar negotiations, yet tonight it became something entirely different. Ethan removed his tuxedo jacket and draped it over the back of a chair, the gesture simple but symbolic, as if he were finally setting down the armor the world had taught him to wear. Amara climbed onto one of the couches first, her cream dress pooling around her knees as she looked out at the city. "Mommy, it looks like stars on the ground," she whispered. Selena smiled softly. "It does." Ethan stood in the kitchenette, sleeves rolled slightly, moving with an awkward sincerity that made the moment almost surreal. The man who had once commanded acquisition teams across 3 continents now found himself carefully slicing strawberries onto 4 small plates, while a staff member quietly brought up fresh pancakes from the executive kitchen. The smell of warm syrup filled the room, gentle and comforting, washing away the cold edge of the ballroom scandal below. Leila watched him closely as he set the plates down on the coffee table. "You really remembered," she said. Ethan looked at her, then at Selena, and something deep and unguarded moved through his expression. "I am going to remember everything from now on," he said softly. The words settled into the room with a weight far greater than the simple meal before them. Selena sat across from him, the skyline silver behind her, and for the first time in years allowed herself to see him outside the shadow of betrayal. Not as the executive who had once broken her heart, but as the man slowly understanding the shape of what had been stolen from both of them. The twins ate happily between them, syrup on their smiles, small laughter warming the room in ways no luxury ever could. Then, in the quiet space that followed, Ethan reached into the inner pocket of the tuxedo jacket he had set aside and pulled out the gold award trophy card, the speech notes he had prepared for the night. He looked at them for a long moment, then set them face down on the marble table. "This was supposed to be the most important night of my career," he said. His eyes lifted to Selena, then to the girls. "But this is the first night that actually means something." Selena held his gaze, the city lights reflecting in the calm strength of her eyes. She did not offer forgiveness. Not yet. But as Amara yawned softly and leaned against Ethan's arm without hesitation, and Leila asked if he knew how to braid hair for tomorrow morning, Selena realized the future had already begun writing itself in ways neither pain nor power could fully control. And just beyond the glass, as the city buzzed with headlines of scandal and downfall, a quieter story was taking shape above it all, not of revenge, but of truth turning into the first fragile shape of family. Morning arrived over Manhattan in pale silver light, the skyline outside the private lounge softened by a thin ribbon of sunrise that turned the glass towers into glowing columns of gold. The chaos of the night before still pulsed through the city below in headlines, legal alerts, and endless speculation. But 40 floors above it, the world had narrowed to something quieter, warmer, and infinitely more important. Amara had fallen asleep curled against Ethan's side sometime after the pancakes, one tiny hand still resting over the sleeve of his white dress shirt. Leila had lasted longer, determined to ask him whether he really knew how to braid hair, but even she had drifted off with her head in Selena's lap, dark curls spilling over the silk of her gown. For the first time in 6 years, Selena was not carrying the whole night alone. She stood now near the window with a paper cup of tea warming her hands, watching the city wake beneath her, while behind her Ethan carefully adjusted the blanket over the twins with a gentleness that made the room feel almost unreal. There was no boardroom polish in him now, no sharp edges, just the slow, deliberate care of a father trying not to waste another second. "I called the board at dawn," Ethan said quietly, keeping his voice low so the girls would not stir. Selena turned slightly, the amber light of the lounge catching the calm in her face. He stood a few feet away, tie removed, sleeves rolled, the exhaustion in his expression honest and unhidden. "Victoria is being formally charged," he continued. "Fraud, obstruction, fiduciary theft, and personal misconduct. The shell accounts led to 3 other executives who helped bury the communications." Selena let the words settle without triumph. Justice mattered, but not because it punished. It mattered because it restored what silence had once stolen. "And the company?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly and glanced toward the sleeping twins. "The board offered to postpone the public statement until next week. I refused. At 9 o'clock this morning, I am stepping down as chief executive." The words landed in the quiet room with the weight of a choice no one in the city would expect from Ethan Blackwell. Selena's eyes searched his face, not for performance, but for truth. What she found there was steady. "Certain. You built that company from nothing," she said. Ethan gave the faintest nod. "And I almost let it cost me everything that actually mattered." He looked toward Amara and Leila again, the softness in his expression deeper than regret. "A title can be rebuilt. Childhood cannot." The sunrise climbed higher, spilling gold across the marble table where last night's award notes still lay face down beside empty syrup dishes and 4 abandoned plates. Symbols of one life ending and another beginning. Selena felt the old walls inside her shift again, not collapsing, but opening. She crossed the room slowly and stood beside the couch where the twins slept, watching Ethan kneel carefully to smooth a loose curl away from Leila's forehead. The tenderness of the gesture silenced every remaining doubt that this moment was real. "They have a school recital next Friday," Selena said after a long pause. Ethan looked up, his expression still and attentive. "Amara is terrified of forgetting her lines, and Leila refuses to sing unless someone in the front row waves first." For a second, he did not speak, as if afraid even hope might break the fragile trust forming between them. Then his voice came quiet and steady. "Tell me what time to be there." Selena held his gaze, the city's first sunlight warming the side of her face. 7 o'clock. Lincoln Arts Academy. Front row. A smile touched Ethan's mouth, small but real, the kind built not from victory, but from gratitude. "I will be there at 6:30. The promise settled into the room like the final piece of something long unfinished. A few moments later, Amara stirred, blinking awake in the golden light. She looked from Selena to Ethan, then toward the city outside. "Is it tomorrow now?" she asked sleepily. Ethan smiled and gently brushed a hand over her curls. "It is," he said, "and I think it is the start of a really good one." Leila woke next, lifting her head from Selena's lap and squinting at Ethan with the seriousness only children could carry at sunrise. "Did you practice braiding?" she asked. A soft laugh escaped Selena before she could stop it. Ethan chuckled too, warm and unguarded. "I watched 3 tutorials before sunrise," he admitted. The twins giggled, the sound bright enough to fill the entire lounge with life. Outside, Manhattan roared into another day of ambition, scandal, and shifting power. But inside the quiet glow above the city, Selena stood with the daughters she had raised in dignity and the man who had finally chosen truth over empire. This was not a fairy tale ending. It was something stronger. A beginning earned through silence, revelation, and the quiet strength of a woman who walked into the brightest room in the city not to destroy a man, but to restore a family. And as the first full sunlight poured through the glass and wrapped all 4 of them in gold, the future no longer looked like revenge or regret. It looked like front row seats, strawberry pancakes, school recitals, and a love that would now have to prove itself in ordinary mornings, where real healing always begins.